Welcome to my fabric tray sew along. This is a super easy beginner sewing project that uses up old scraps of fabric, particularly if you've inherited or you've got loads of old silk ties lying around that you don't know what to do with. As well as your silk ties, you'll need some fusible interfacing. This is kind of a medium weight and I've linked this one that I use in my Amazon store. We'll be cutting squares about 6 1/4 by 6 1/4 inches. So if you've got a template, you can use that, make one, or just use a ruler. And we'll be marking a second square 3 inches by 3 inches. So I made a small perspex template because I'm going to be making quite a lot of these. And you'll need a piece of cotton fabric that complements the colour of your silk tie or whatever other fabric you have chosen. First thing we need to do is unpick the ties so that we can get to the silk. When you're unpicking, use the red dotted side so that you don't cut through it with the sharp piece of the quick unpick. Unpick it all and then take the lining out so that you're just left with the piece of silk. On the bit, if you've got a bit across the bottom, I just use scissors just to cut that off as well. Once you've unpicked everything, we're going to go to the iron and we're just going to press that flat. I'd suggest using a pressing cloth and remember to put your heat at the silk setting so that you don't burn the fabric. Then you just want to cut a square from that silk that's 6 1/4 inches by 6 1/4 inches. Cut one piece the same size from your lining fabric and 2 pieces of interfacing, but don't do what I did and cut straight through your silk and have to go and start all over again. So you should have one piece of silk and one piece of lining, 6 1/4 inches by 6 1/4 inches, and the same with 2 pieces of fusible interfacing. I've used fusible interfacing rather than batting because silk really isn't a beginner-friendly fabric. So what we need to do is on the wrong side of your silk and your cotton, you want to iron on gently your fusible interfacing to it, and that makes it a much stiffer piece of fabric to work with and just generally much easier overall. So you should now have your 2 pieces of fabric with their interfacing attached, and you want to pin them right sides together. Mark a space a couple of inches apart where you're not going to sew, and then we're going to go to the machine and you're going to sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance just round those 4 edges, leaving that gap. And when you start and stop, you want to do a little back tack just so it doesn't come apart when you're turning it the right side out. Then you want to clip the corners. Be careful you're not cutting into the stitches. And now it's time to turn it the right side out. I find it easier to put my thumb in and go to one of the opposite corners and then feed it through from there, and it tends to turn a lot more easily. Pull it through and push out all the 4 corners with your fingers, and then you'll want to go in with your chopstick, or I use this Hera marker because it's got a slightly pointier end, and then just either putting it on the table or wiggling it around. You just want to make sure you've got all of those corners nice and crisp. Once you've done that, then find the gap where you didn't sew and just press that in as well and finger press it. And then you're just going to clip that, and then we're going to head to the iron and give the whole thing a good press. Now we need to sew a top stitch all the way around, and that will close up that gap, and it will look something like this. So you just go as close to the edge as you feel comfortable. Taking your 3-inch square template, you want to put that in the middle of the square of fabric and either mark with your Hera marker or with a fabric pen a square 3 inches right in the middle. Take that to the machine and simply sew over that line you've just created, and that creates the base of the tray. And then all that's left is to create those corners. So what you want to do is you want to pinch that corner and fold it on the diagonal. So you can see what I'm doing here. And then I just put a clip in about 1 inch down. Do that on all 4 corners, and then we're going to sew on those corners about 1/4 inch in with embroidery thread. I inherited this big bag of embroidery thread from my mum. I've not known how to use, so I'm going to be using that. But you could use normal thread if you haven't got embroidery thread. Get yourself a needle. I'm using an embroidery needle because it's got a slightly bigger eye on it, which makes it easier for threading. And then once you've threaded it, I just wrap it around the end of the needle and pull it through, and that gives you a nice easy knot. I've done a separate Genius hack on how to do this if you want to watch it in more slow motion. So just pull that knot through, cut the end off, and then we're going to be sewing those corners. To start, I come up from inside that bit that I've pinched, and then you'll see you've got the knot, and you just want to poke that down so that it's not showing, and then you'll just sew through 2 or 3 times just till it's really nice and secure. If you're using thinner thread, you may need to sew a few more times, but that's the nice thing about embroidery thread. You only need to do it a few times. Once you've done that, on the last go, leave a slight loop and then pull your thread through that, and that creates a small knot. And then I just sew through, come out the other side and cut it off. And that means that you haven't got any knots visible in the bit that you've just sewn. Do the same on all 4 corners and you have made yourself a gorgeous little fabric tray. If you like my sew along, please do like, share, subscribe for more. And so I can keep these free, if you'd like to say thanks, you can buy me a coffee. The link's in my bio. Thanks.